So, I had a pastor in Richland who, his name was Dave as well, Pastor Dave, and he's 72, 73 years old now, and he was a great guy, and I loved working for him, and he was a lot of fun, and he would draw these crazy pictures and stuff and would hand them to me during the week, and it's just like, what? And he'd come up with these crazy nicknames for stuff, and one of the things that he always did that I always would just kind of laugh, and because he would always come to me and he would say, "Sean, do you remember?" And I don't know if he did this on purpose or if he just for some reason his brilliant brain could not fit this important fact into it, that I was 30 years younger than him. And so the things that he would share with me, "Do you remember?" I would always end up telling him, "Dave, I was not born yet. How can I remember that?" But he would just laugh and continue with his story. So this morning I'm actually going to talk a little bit about something I have very little personal experience with. And so I thought I'd ask someone much older than me to verify this reality. So, Pastor Bob, is it true that when you were a kid, you didn't have to wear a seatbelt?
What's a seatbelt? Honestly, that was a little bit before my time, but Robbie here can tell you.
Yes, you remember, yeah. I remember just a little bit when I was like a little kid, having times when I didn't have to wear a seatbelt or whatever. But for the most part, my whole life has been, wearing seatbelts, right? But it's interesting because, the seatbelt thing, it's like we've had cars for a little over 100 years now, right? 115, 120 years, something like that. And we have, started out, they went pretty slow. We didn't go very fast, right? And we didn't really, I don't know that, when did seatbelts come about, right? I didn't look it up. 1964, thank you. We have our local historian right here. Seatbelt historian, he knows it. Yeah. So, seatbelts weren't around all the time, right? So you just didn't have them in your car. And then eventually you had them. They had these little lap belts, and then they had the shoulder belt, and it kind of snapped to the, lap belt and all that kind of stuff, right? But we have these seatbelts that have become a really big part of our life, right? And, it started out that people, that we had, it wasn't a law, right? It was just like, this is a good idea. And so we had these commercials that come out, and talk about, how it's a good idea to, wear a seatbelt. You had the police officer that would come on at the end of the commercial and say, "I have never unbuckled a dead man." This kind of thing, right? That's supposed to scare me into wearing a seatbelt, whatever, right? But you probably remember that, right? So, but at first it was just kind of, this is a good idea. It would probably save your life if you wore a seatbelt. Then eventually, of course, because America is so great, we had to legalize it, right? We had to make it legal, right? So that now it's a law if you don't wear your seatbelt. And I'm not saying that's a bad law. I'm just saying it is, right? It's a law. But so we had this law now that tells us that we have to wear seatbelts, right? So with this whole seatbelt thing, though, I've found that there's different groups of people. Some people, they totally embrace the seatbelt thing. They just as soon as they had them in cars, they started wearing them, right? They didn't need anybody to try to encourage them to take them or didn't need a law to tell them to wear their seatbelt, right? They just would wear their seatbelt. They just would, this makes sense, logical, car, is an accident. I don't want to go through the windshield. This will keep me in the car. Everything will be great. This is a good idea, and so they wear the seatbelt. Then you have other groups of people that just flat out reject seatbelts. And maybe it's because they lived, a bunch of years without seatbelts, and they're like, come on, my mom, her arm is just as good as a seatbelt. What's the big deal? We don't need seatbelts. Whatever. It's not. They question the logic of it. The law. They rant about the law. Oh, you can't believe you make me have to wear these seatbelts, or I get a ticket if I don't, or whatever. And they just totally reject the idea of seatbelts. And then you have a third group of people that kind of go, what, seatbelts are, I can see that they'd be helpful, right? It makes sense that, that would be good probably to wear a seatbelt and to have that extra protection just in case you're in an accident. But yet, they don't really always abide by that reality, right? They can't, seatbelts are uncomfortable, or I'm just running to the store, right? So I'm not, what's going to happen? I'm going 25 miles an hour or whatever, right? And so they just kind of, in their mind, they go, yeah, it makes sense that, if I'm going on a long trip, maybe I'll wear a seatbelt, but, most of the time I'm not. And so when it comes to the law thing, they kind of try to beat the system, and they'll kind of loop the shoulder belt over, their shoulder, but they won't actually buckle it, they just kind of have it there, and so like, yeah, it looks like I'm wearing my seatbelt. And for me, I kind of did this a little bit. I had a 1990 Toyota Corolla. Sweet car, man. Oh, man. 4-speed. Anyway, but it had, that crazy thing. They had cars that had the seatbelts attached to the door, right? So that you basically, you couldn't, get in the car without the seatbelt being on, right? But the lap belt was separate. And so I would get in my Toyota, right? And I'd have my shoulder belt hooked up, but my lap belt, nope, wouldn't have that on, right? So I could just drive around kind of like, I'm getting by, I'm kind of working the system here. Really, because I'm just going down the street. It's not a big deal, right? One time I actually got pulled over and I wasn't wearing my seatbelt. It all worked out in the end. But anyway, it kind of freaked me out a little bit. Oh, I guess I probably should wear that. Anyway, so 3 different types of people. Those who just totally accept it. Yeah, seatbelts are a good idea, I'm going to do it. Those who totally reject it, this doesn't make any sense, I'm not doing it. And then the third group, it makes sense, but, I don't know if it's really not, I don't have to wear it all the time. Well, this is these 3 groups of people is actually true with a lot of things that we run into in our world, and especially true when it comes to Jesus. Jesus as Lord. We have people in our world that automatically and just accept it right away. Yes, there is a God, and that God has a moral way of life that we are to live, and Jesus is Lord, and I'm going to accept that and live that out in my life because it is. It makes sense, and they just are living that out. There's others that look at Jesus as Lord, and they just totally flat out reject him. No, wait a second, maybe there's a God, but probably not. Where's the proof? This doesn't add up in my mind. It doesn't make sense, and they just totally reject Jesus as Lord. And then there's, of course, the third group that is kind of like, you know what? Yeah, I got to give this mental assent that, yeah, I think there's probably a God, but, I don't know, how much I, really need to have that in my life. And some of it I kind of like, and some of the ideas are pretty good, and so maybe I'll kind of do some of those things, but, most of the time it's not going to really be the pattern of my life. And Peter, in the chapter that we're looking at today, and the verses that we're looking at in chapter 2 of 1 Peter, he basically is sharing with us this reality of Jesus. That we have these different groups of people that have these different perspectives and way of interacting and responding to Jesus. And the reason that Peter is doing this for us is he wants to give us a perspective. See, the rest of this chapter, he's going to go in and talk about how we are to interact with this world. He says, I want you to understand before we talk about how we personally interact with the world and authorities in this world, I want you to understand this perspective, that Jesus is Lord, but the world has rejected him. And some haven't totally rejected him, but they're kind of riding the fence or playing the game. Because understanding and having that perspective will help us when we get to the rest of the chapter where Peter begins to tell us how we need to engage with this world. All right? So that's kind of where we're at and where we're headed. So let's read 1 Peter 2, verses 4 through 8. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him. You also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame." Now to you who believe, this stone is precious. But to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. So, this message this morning, we have three responses to Jesus, but Peter starts with laying out who Jesus is, right? He starts by calling him the living stone, right? That this is speaking to the character of Jesus. Jesus is alive, right? He's not dead. We start talking about foundations, right, and rocks. Generally speaking, we as human beings go, okay, well, it's not alive. It's just dead. It just sits there. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't think anything. It just is a stone, right? It's just there. But so Peter wants to be clear. He says, I'm going to talk about Jesus as the living stone, or as the cornerstone. But before I get there, you need to understand that he's not dead, right? He's not just this thing that's there, that he is alive, that he is active, that he is involved in this world, that he is the living stone, okay? And so he starts there talking about Jesus as this living stone. He is risen from the dead, but he's also chosen and precious. From the creation of the world, God chose Jesus to be the center of everything. He chose Jesus to be the one that the way would go through. He chose Jesus to be the cornerstone. Matthew chapter 3, Jesus is getting baptized in verses 16 and 17, and this amazing interchange between Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God the Father. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was open, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased." We see, even from the beginning of Jesus' ministry, God wanted to make known that Jesus was his chosen one. That Jesus was his precious child. This is my Son, whom I love. So we have Jesus as this living stone, but he's also chosen and precious. It's not just some random stone, right? That this specific one has been chosen for this specific purpose. And Jesus is that specific chosen one who is precious to the Lord. And then finally, of course, Peter describes Jesus as the cornerstone. The cornerstone has two distinctions about the cornerstone when you're building a building. One, it's the first stone to go in the foundation. So when we understand that in regards to Jesus, we understand that Jesus is the first. He's the first one to cross over from death to life. He is the first one adopted into the family of God and to receive the eternal body. He is the first one. He has paved the way for the rest of us. He is the first to be laid in this foundation of the kingdom of heaven. Also, the other part of a cornerstone is that the cornerstone lays the boundaries of the building. The cornerstone determines how big the building is going to be. It determines what the angles of the building are going to be. The cornerstone sets the boundaries for the building so that everything else is going to come off of that cornerstone. It is the stone that sets the limits. The stone that sets the boundaries. And in regards to Christ, he is the one. He has given us the model of the Christian life. He's lived it, and he asks us to follow him in that. He has laid out the boundaries of our life. And how are we to live, and what we are to do, and what we are to hope for, and how we're supposed to perceive things. He is the one that we all seek to follow. He's the one we seek to be like. So Jesus is the living stone. He's precious and chosen by God, and he's the cornerstone. And he influences the whole building as a result. Jesus is, in reality, in truth, he is the foundation for all of life. Whether we accept him or not, he's still the foundation. Whether we choose to build our life on him or not, he is the foundation. He is truth. We, as Christians, are the first group that respond to Jesus as the living stone. And our response is acceptance, right? As Christians, we say, yes, we come to understand who Jesus is and what he did and the way of the world and who God is and who we are. And we just say, you know what, this makes sense. And so we choose to accept this message. We choose to be a part of this world that God has created for us. That we choose to be a part of the foundation that Jesus has created for us. We choose, in essence, to become living stones as well. That we are part of what Jesus is building. We have accepted the message. We've accepted that Jesus is Lord, and we have chosen to bend our knee to him. Those who trust Jesus are living stones. Those who trust Jesus also will know that they will not be put to shame. That this foundation that we are stepping into, that we're trusting in, that it's a firm foundation, and it will last through all of life's chaos. That we can trust that in the end, we're not going to be disappointed. We're not going to get to death's door and then go, oh, wait a second, this is not what I expected, right? Or that, wait a second, Jesus, where are you? We're not going to be forsaken. We are going to be embraced. That the foundation that we're standing on is good and eternal and will last forever and will help us to even make it through the storms of this life, the challenges that come. Matthew 7, 24 and 25. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says these words. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. So we as Christians, we are those who trust in Jesus. We are those who will not be put to shame. And again, we are living stones, which means we are part of the building. And being part of the building means that we are in line with Jesus. We have accepted the boundaries that he has laid, and we have decided that we are going to stay within those boundaries. They're going to accept those boundaries and be a part of that. We also are influencing the rest of the building. Now, the cornerstone determines the size, right, of the building and the angles of the building, and kind of everything else comes off of that. But we, as part of the building, we also have an impact on the building. There's other people that are connected to us as we are connected to the cornerstone. And the way we live our life, or the things that we do, or the things that we think, and the ways we act in this world, that's going to impact those other people that are in this building, but also will impact the way those who are not a part of the building see the building. See, we are meant to look like Jesus. This is why he's given us the path. That's why he's the first, that we would follow in his footsteps, that we would live like he lived, that we would act like he acted, that we would live by the Spirit as he lived by the Spirit, so that when people in the world see us, they would see Jesus. The song says, that we may be the only Jesus some will ever see. So true, right? That we are Jesus for them, that we're the ones that we're going out and that people are seeing whether or not they like Jesus or not based on what they not like us. Now, the great thing about this is that it's not dependent on our own righteousness, right? It's dependent on Christ's righteousness, right? He's done the work. We just need to live in that, right? And embrace that. It's not that, we're going to mess things up and ruin things for Jesus. It's just the reality is that as we connect to Jesus, his reality flows through us. That people would see Jesus through us as long as we are connected to him. All right, so the first reaction or response to Jesus is as the living stone. The second is Jesus as the rejected stone. Some in our world, many in our world actually, have rejected Jesus. They have outright rejected Jesus. And in general, it's pride that keeps them from acceptance. 1 Corinthians 1, 21 to 23. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand a sign and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. See, the reality of the gospel message is it's not easy to accept if you still have pride in your heart. If you want to be in control, if you want to feel like you've accomplished something, if you want to, have, control over the destiny of your life, right? If you want to, get the credit, if you want to earn it, if you want to feel like you've accomplished something, then the gospel message is really hard to accept. There's so many things about being a Christian that are opposite from what the world tells us. So many things that, if we walk this way, it means we're going to have to reject the world's perspective and the world's way of doing things. And to the world, it seems like foolishness the way we walk. Consider Jesus' message about turning the other cheek. In our American rights-oriented culture, that does not compute. We as Christians are like, wait a second, if somebody slaps me, come on, let's go, I'm defending myself, right? And yet Jesus says, no, let's turn the other cheek. That's just foolishness, right? And that is the gospel message, is it's foolishness to the world. Those who reject Christ are rejecting him because they're like, this doesn't make sense. I mean, really, mom's arm can stop me from going through the window. Right? I mean, that's the idea here, that they recognize that, yeah, okay, this is a perspective, but that doesn't make any sense to me. It's illogical for me. If I'm going to accomplish something, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to be dependent on somebody else to do it for me. So we have a world that rejects Jesus, mainly because of pride, but I've got 5 things here that are kind of common reasons that why people would reject Christ. First, they just reject who he was or who he is. They, maybe have heard the stories and read the books about who God is and who Jesus was, and they might even say, yeah, Jesus was a man who lived a couple thousand years ago, but they don't accept that he was God. That doesn't make sense. I mean, really, come on, God, man, no, come on, that doesn't make any sense. It's not real. And so they just reject Jesus just because they don't accept who he said he was. Others reject him because of the fact that he says there's only one way. And we read in our opening reading, John 14:6, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Some in this world are just like, whoa, wait a second. I'm okay with religion, but when it comes to this Christianity thing and there's only one way, no. There's a bunch, that doesn't make sense. There's got to be a bunch of different ways. I mean, how can Christians have the corner on the market of, salvation, right? There's got to be other ways. I mean, why are they so smart, right? So we have those who reject him just because of the fact that there's only one way. And then there's those who reject because of the idea that all are sinners and that they can't earn their own salvation. Like, well, wait a second. I live a pretty good life. I don't do a lot of sinning. I don't murder. I've never murdered anybody. I'm not committing adultery. I don't generally lie. I mean, I never stole. Well, I stole that one thing, and I was young though, and it's all right. You know what I'm saying? This idea that I'm a pretty good person. What do you mean I'm a sinner? What do you mean I need to be saved? I mean, God, you're kind of arrogant, aren't you? It's all about you. You want me to bow to you and ask for your forgiveness because I'm all bad. What? I can make it on my own. Why do I have to go through you? Right? So this idea that I can earn my salvation is why some reject Christ. Some reject Christ because of the free gift of grace. They're like, you know what? It's not fair. I mean, you're telling me that if I become a Christian today and I live my whole life for 20, 30 years or whatever, and 40 years, 50 years, and I'm towing the line and I'm doing the Christian thing and going to follow all these practices, but then there's somebody else who on their deathbed prays a prayer, and Jesus, he's going to get the same benefits as I get? That's not fair. And so they reject Jesus because of grace. And then finally, some reject Jesus because he actually requires surrender. The statement, Jesus is Lord, means something. And they're like, you know what, I don't want to give up that lordship. I want it. Why do I have to say Jesus is Lord? Can't I just live my life the way I want and then just go to church on Sundays? I mean, what's all this about Jesus being Lord? So these are reasons, and there's many more, that why people tend to reject Jesus outright. But we also, as Christians, need to recognize that that they will reject us as well. As Christians, we will be rejected by the world. In America, we have for a long time tried to capitulate to the world and appease the world and tried to kind of basically walk this line of being a Christian but also having the best of this world. And because of the peace and the freedoms that we have in this country, we actually can do that and do it pretty well without much consequence. But the reality is, if we are going to stand up for Christ and the truth of God's word, we should expect we will be rejected. That when we set a line or to say that this is what God says, that we would expect that people are going to push back against that. But here's the thing we have to keep in mind. They are not rejecting you. They are rejecting Christ. We so often as Christians start second-guessing ourselves when we go out there and we take a stand for Jesus, or we go out there and we share Christ or with the gospel message with somebody and we get pushback, or we get hate from people, or people begin to kind of be mean to us or reject us and say, get out of here. And we start to think, oh, what did I do wrong? Do we ever think that maybe we just did what was right? And the world is rejecting us because we did what's right? Let me encourage you, Christians, to continue to be bold in sharing your faith and the gospel message and standing up for what God stands up for, even in the face of rejection. Matter of fact, expecting to do that in the face of rejection. All right, so the second response is those who see Jesus as the rejected stone, and then the final one is Jesus the stumble stone. This is the ones that basically the people that give the mental assent to wearing the seatbelt, right? Yeah, it makes sense, right? I mean, I should probably wear a seatbelt, and it'd probably be good for me, but they're not really willing to go the whole way and actually live it out. And actually, this group of people in the stumble zone are probably in a worse position than those who have actually rejected. Consider Jesus' word, Revelation 3:15 and 16. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other, so because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth, right? Jesus is saying, look, it'd almost be better if you just rejected me outright or accepted me outright, but to play the fence is the worst spot to be. Yet, I will say this, our churches have a lot of fence sitters. And the challenge of this, the challenge of being the fence sitter, is you really don't know where they lie. We don't know if they've really rejected Jesus, and we don't know whether they've really accepted Jesus. And to personalize it, we don't know if I've really accepted Jesus or if I've actually rejected Jesus. So this stumble zone is a really precarious place to be, because we can look a lot like Christian, but not be Christian. Matthew 7, and this is scary. I don't like this passage because it's a scary passage, I think, in my mind, right? Matthew 7, 22 and 23, Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, says, many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Those who are on the fence, maybe this is what they're going to hear from Jesus. That Jesus never knew them. So this stumble area it's an important piece for us to be aware of, not only for our own life, but also for our evaluation of others and encouragement to others. That we would be able to see where these stumble zones are so that we can be aware of them and avoid them and be sure that we're not on the fence anymore. That we would get off of the fence and make sure that not only in my mind, but in the world's mind as well, they can see that I've fully accepted Jesus. Because the reality is that even Christians, legitimate Christians, can stumble. 1 Corinthians 3:12-15, if anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day, judgment day, will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. This passage goes on to say that some will be saved, but only as one escaping the flames. The idea is that we can be Christians sometimes, totally accepted Christ and Jesus as Lord, but we are dabbling in the stumble zone. We are dabbling with this fence line and spending our time there instead of over here in the fully accepted zone. We're still saved in the end, but we don't have much to show for our Christian life. So ways that we resemble Christianity, or the world can resemble Christianity, but we'll find that they will stumble over Jesus. First is that of those who are religious people. They love to live as pious human beings, right? That they would be seen by other people as being kind of all put together, that they're a religious person. They've got a certain way that they live their life and that they certain moral code that they go by. And these people who are resembling Christianity, they love to grab actually Christian morals. And they like to add them to their lives. They're not really Christians, but they will grab these Christian morals and say, I'm going to live according to these Christian morals because I like these Christian morals. But they're not really Christians. They're just dabbling with this kind of area, and they want to be seen as pious. But they will stumble over grace. When they see the free gift that it is, that Christianity really isn't about going to church every Sunday. It's not about just, praying and going to Bible studies. It's not about reading the Bible. It's not about, being nice to other people. It's not about the moral code. When they find out about grace, it knocks them flat. They fall over. Because that just doesn't compute in their religious world. Next is leadership. Those who desire to have control and to be a leader in their world. And so they love to find principles to lead by and to live by, right? And these are the ones who love church, the Bible principles, right? They may know the Bible pretty well, actually, because they go, oh my gosh, in this Bible there's a lot of great stuff in here and principles to live by. And I'm going to use those and participate in those in my life, put them into my life. And so they kind of grab all these principles and they think that this is the answer, but they're not really Christians. They're just playing this kind of role of Christian. They're just using Christianity as a way to find some good principles to live by. But they will end up stumbling over God's sovereignty. When they realize it's not actually about the principles to live by. That we have a God who is sovereign and will do whatever he wants. But whatever he wants is always right. That sometimes the principles that are even found in his word, sometimes they won't play out 100% the way we thought they would. And so we have to come to a point of understanding God's sovereignty. And the reality is an omniscient and omnipotent God, an all-knowing and all-powerful God, is way better than having individual or corporate influence, to have all the principles figured out and control of our life. Next, you have the activist who loves to live for a cause. They want something to live for, right? And so they're looking to care for other people. They usually have big hearts, and they just love to care for those who can't care for themselves. And they usually give a lot of their time and energy and money to be able to care for those people that can't defend themselves and to help out the poor. And they spend a lot of time at the homeless shelters and this kind of thing. And they're living for the cause, and they actually go and they grab Christian ethics. They like Christian ethics. It makes sense, that you would do more for others than, think of others higher than yourself, that humility. They like that, and they kind of grab onto that and enjoy that and be a part of that. But they end up stumbling over actually the relationship that God offers. The relationship, the intimate love relationship with God. It's when they realize that they're doing all this stuff, but they don't have a real relationship with the people they're caring for. When they realize that Jesus says, you know what, it's not about doing all those things. If you're just doing them to do them, you've got to know me. And then if you perform miracles, I know you, and it means something. You have to know me, and then if you prophesy, it means something because you know me, not the other way around. Next is intellectuals. They live for knowledge. They like to be in the know, right? They just, they want to have all the facts, and they're studiers. They'll grab books, and they will start going through any topic, and they thinking, I think I want to invest. I've got some extra money. I want to invest. So they go and buy all these books, and they read and, get to know all they can about investments, right? I mean, these are the intellectual types. They love to know, and they actually oftentimes will use Christian knowledge. They like to have those philosophical conversations, right, about, the meaning of life and that kind of stuff. And they find that Christianity has got some interesting, thoughts on that. And so they like to have those conversations, but oftentimes play the devil's advocate, right? And just kind of throw out these little bombs. Oh, well, what about this, right? And trying to trip up Christians or whatever. But they will end up tripping up themselves, and they'll stumble over the mystery of God. That you can't know everything about God. That he's infinite and we're finite. And that there's no possible way we will ever fully understand God. A God beyond understanding is way better than having full comprehension. And that's where they trip up. Finally, the spirituals, those who live by emotions. They're the ones who are seeking experience, right? And we have a lot of spirituals in our culture today, right? Everybody wants to kind of have this spiritual kind of, just experience in their life, right? And so we have a lot of people say, oh, I'm a spiritual person, right? And so they, participate in meditation maybe, or all kinds of, just a hodgepodge of all these different things that they grab from all these different religions and different experiences, and they kind of put them in their life, and they this is the spiritual life that I want to live, right? But again, it's a stumbling block because they end up stumbling over the absolute truth of God and that Jesus is Lord. Because they get to the point where they realize, it's not about your emotions. It's not about your feelings, because sometimes we feel things are right when they're wrong, and sometimes we feel things are wrong when they're right. And that there's actually an absolute truth in regards to who God is, who Jesus is, and who we are. All right. Worship team, why don't you come forward? Just a couple of thoughts as we close here. 3 different responses to Jesus as the cornerstone. First, those of us as Christians, that we accept Jesus. We accept that he is the cornerstone, and we desire to align our life with him, that we would be like him, that we would look like him, that we would totally bow to him as Jesus is Lord, our Lord. And this is a great place to be, and a way for us to focus on him, and God will use us, and the world will see him through us. And there are many in this room that I'm sure are in that response area. And let me encourage you to continue to seek Jesus. Continue to focus your attention on him. Continue to understand that he is the foundation. Continue to recognize that our life is in him, and that without him we have nothing. That to try to live without him is failure, for sure. And that we would be patient enough, even if God has nothing for us to do today, that we would rest in him. and rest in knowledge that He will give us what to do when it's time for us to do it. The second group of people that we probably don't have anyone in here that is in this category, because if you've rejected Jesus, you probably wouldn't step foot in a church. But the rejected Jesus folks, we need to understand, and for us as Christians, we need to understand they are still out there. They are still rejecting Jesus, and we have Jesus. May we not be afraid to continue to share the love of Christ with them. May we not shy away. Just because they've rejected Jesus in the past does not mean that they will always reject Jesus. May we continue to love on them and care for them and share the gospel with them, no matter how many times they reject us. But remember, they're not rejecting us, they're rejecting Christ. Finally, it's the group of stumblers, and this is perhaps the area that is most challenging for us today, for some of us maybe. Because the reality is that there very well may be some of the stumblers in this group. People that have maybe been going to church for a long time, but have never really accepted Jesus as Lord. They dislike some of the principles or some of the lifestyles and the ethics and some of the things that are going on in the church, and so they want to get close to that. And they're just like, you know what? I can do this. I don't have to actually, fully commit. I can just give a little bit. So Sunday mornings, I get to give, my life a little bit to Jesus. There's some of us probably in this room that are stumblers, that are in that category. And let me encourage you, if that's where you're at, I hope Matthew chapter 7 scares you a little bit. That you would recognize that you're not going to get benefit for just riding the fence. That you would recognize that you've got to make a choice. And I think firmly what Jesus desires for all of us is to make a choice. Don't walk the fence line. He is calling us to a choice, and He's calling you this morning to a choice. Stop sitting on the fence and make your choice. If you believe Jesus is Lord, then accept Him fully and jump in, all in. If you don't, then get out. Stop riding the fence and pretending to get some of the benefits from being a Christian when you're actually not all in. Hard words, I know, but this is, I think, what Jesus is calling us to. This is what Peter is saying. Look, there's this stumbling zone. And too often we live in it. And as North American Christians, we get the privilege of doing this for too long because the church has corrupted itself in a lot of ways to become too Americanized. And so people who are Americans feel very comfortable in too many churches. When they're actually not living their life for Christ, they don't spend any time with Christ. They just want to have all the benefits. They want fire insurance is all they want. They want to feel like, you know what, I went to church today, so now I feel good about myself so that I'm not going to end up in hell someday. But that is not the church that Jesus is building. That's not the church the relationship that Jesus is calling us to. Jesus is calling us to be all in, to recognize that He is the foundation of all life, and that we would step onto that foundation and live that life fully. Get off of the fence, one way or the other. The most dangerous place for you to be is in the zone of stumbling, to be on the fence. Because you may actually fool yourself into thinking that you are a Christian, that you are saved, and that you're going to make it in the end. I don't know what the Lord's saying to you right now, and so I hope it's well beyond what I have been saying to you. Well, let's just take this before the Lord, and whatever He may have for you this morning, I don't know. Wherever He's speaking to you, embrace it. Don't fight it. Just open our hearts. Let's hear what He has for us today in this moment as we continue to worship in song. May He continue to clarify the message that He has for you today. Let's go ahead and stand and let's worship.